How long do you think it's going to be before they make the announcement that we've had contact with outer space and they call for what?
Never.
You don't think so?
No. I used to think so. I used to think they were getting us prepared, but I have no doubt now that they never intended to, and I fully agree with them. Now, 5, 6, 7 years ago, you know, I was going on the lecture, hey, you got to listen to this, you got to see what's going on. Now, I know they were right. I mean, mankind is not and will never be ready for this kind of information. Sure, it's interesting for you and me and you know, a very small segment of society, and it's tremendously interesting. But no way should the public ever be told about this.
What do you think would happen if they were?
It would probably cause problems that the governments of the world are not equipped to handle. The basic issue is religion.
John, how many world records did you hold? 17?
17.
17.
They've all been broken. Most of them have been broken because of the new airplanes that have come out.
Yeah. I'm hearing rumors at Area 51 that there's at least one live alien living there.
There definitely is one live alien, regardless of what Bob says today.
Yeah.
We're talking about Bob Lazar. During December and January, December of 1988, January of 1989, when he was working up there, he sat right in that chair whenever he'd come back from the test site, and he'd tell me what he saw. And I'll never forget the January 1989. I was sitting at that desk writing out checks, and he comes in and he said, "John, you'll never know what it's like to see your first alien."
Could you relate the you know, the times you went up there with the Lazar looking for craft yourself?
We went up twice. The first time was not. The first time he knew it was going to fly. He knew it was going to fly just after sunset, and that was March 22nd, 1989. And we drove up there with Gene Huff, and we had my motorhome. And we pulled in just as it was getting dark, and I was setting up the Celestron scope. And they were outside looking. They said, "Here it comes." And you can see this real bright light coming up from behind the range. So I got the Celestron scope hooked up and got it focused in, and had, you know, like maybe about 15, 20 seconds. I don't have the scope here, but it's 8 inches, and it's a huge scope, and the disc, you know, pretty much filled the field of view, and it was tilted like about 30 degrees. It was kind of yellow-orange, and it was kind of diffusing, and I just saw it just as it started to go back down the mountain. And we waited a couple hours that night and didn't see it again. The next Wednesday night was March 29th, and I was on a flight with American Transair stuck in Minneapolis. And that's the night I phoned Bob and said, "What's going on?" He said, "We're going fishing." And I thought, oh, neat. And that was his code word for we're going up to Groom Lake. Well, several weeks later, when they took him up to Indian Springs with a gun pointed in his head, they said, "Oh, that comment about going fishing, boy, it sure took us a long time to figure that out." They were pretty sarcastic over it. You know, they were taping both our phones here. Anyway, that was the night that they got the film of the saucer stitching its way across the sky, the night sky that George Knapp and a few others used. Incidentally, the first night we were so excited that the video camera stayed right on the bumper of the motorhome. It didn't get pointed at it. I don't know why that happens, but it does. Anyway, the third night was April 6, 1989, and that's when Gene and me and Bob's wife, and his wife's sister went up there. We rented a car because I had blown the transmission on the motorhome, and Bob just had a two-place 280Z, and I had just my truck, so we rented a car to go up there. There was no mystery about that, which people make a big deal about, but we just had no other way to get up there. We drove in. We had in the back Geiger counters, film, cameras, videos, everything. And as we drove down Groom Lake Road at that time, we thought that the legal cutoff was that road that comes down from Mailbox Road. And so when we got there, I said, look, let's just stay here, and even if we get a mile closer, it's not going to make that much difference in the film. And they said, no, no, let's go on. So we went another couple hundred feet, and we had the lights out, and I was leaning out the window, telling them to go left and right. We stopped, and a couple sets of headlights, as we stopped, a couple sets of headlights came on in front of the vehicle, and we decided to run because I thought we were in illegal territory. As it turns out, we weren't, and we could have all avoided a lot of trouble, and Bob never would have lost his job, and I never would have lost mine if we'd have just, sat there and let him walk up to us. But the fact is, we thought we were in illegal territory, and we turned around, we started going 90 miles an hour down the road with them in hot pursuit. We almost made it to the highway, but they had sent another Bronco around and cut us off. And when we saw him coming down the road, we stopped. Bob ran out in the desert. I jumped out and started setting up the telescope, and that's when the first Bronco came to a halt. And I ran up and threw my hands against the top of the car, and I said, holy smokes, you guys aren't dopers, are you? You scared the hell out of us out here. And they get out, and they all were armed with machine guns. They stand around. There was like 4 or 5 of them, and they stood at port arms around us. And the one guy said, what are you guys doing up here? And we said, oh, we're just looking at the stars. He said, well, why did you run? And I said, like I said, we thought you were dopers. And he said, well, we're not. We need to see some identification, and we showed him some, we had to give him our Social Security and the driver's license, and he ran it, and all this process took about 30 minutes. And he said, we can't kick you off the range here because it's BLM land. He said, but we'll make it awful uncomfortable if you stay here. So they turned around and left. We stood behind the car waiting for about 15 minutes, and then Bob comes out of the desert. And we start talking about all the stuff that we'd done, the 3 weeks before, the 2 weeks before, all the stuff that we had done that night, all the preparation and everything, not realizing that all the time they had just gone about maybe 100 meters down the road and were filming us in infrared and listening to us with a parabolic microphone, all of which was made readily apparent to Bob the next day when he was taken up to security. But anyway, we had no idea this was going on, even though there were several real good clues. And one was, one of the guys down there dropped a scope. And we not only heard it, but we saw it, and we saw a cigarette. But nobody ever decided, I don't even know why we didn't go down and investigate. But the fact is we didn't. So anyway, we packed up our stuff and went out on the road. And as we got to the highway, we were stopped by the Lincoln County Sheriff, Doug Lamoureux, who has since become a good friend. And he kept us there for an hour. He wanted to see in the trunk, but we wouldn't let him in there, mainly because that was where the gun was that Bob had taken out in the desert. But anyway, it seems that Lamoureux knew exactly what was going on. He wanted to know why there was 5 people in the vehicle now and only 4 on the test site, and he wanted to know where the gun was. So obviously there was communication between the security forces on the test site and the sheriff. Anyway, we stood there for an hour. Nobody said anything. And finally, to bring this all to a halt, Bob decided to confess that it was his gun, and it was in the trunk. And I saw him walking to go ahead and do it. And at that split second, Doug said, okay, look, here's what we're going to do. I've been advised to release you guys, but we don't want to ever see you here again, ever. And he let us go. And it was a real quiet ride home that night. And the next day, Bob's boss, Dennis Mariana, called him up and said, Bob, I'm going to pick you up. Don't go to the airplane. Meaning don't go to the EG&G. He picked him up. He drove him up to Indian Springs, which is this site of the entire security for the test site. And they actually pulled him out of the car with a gun in his head and a gun in his ear and said, Bob, when we gave you the security clearance and told you this was a secret, it didn't mean you could tell all your friends about the flying saucers. Now, do you want to work with us or not? And he was non-committal. And for the next few days, he was making up his mind. And I think the reason he decided not to continue working up there was the fact that the last 2 trips that he made up to Groom Lake, he can remember flying up and flying back, but he couldn't remember what they did. And the mind control program that they have for the people that are involved up there in very, very classified programs is disconcerting. You can remember everything you have to when you're up there at work and everything, but when you come back, you can't remember anything. All you can remember is getting in the airplane and coming back. And that was real disconcerting to Bob, who has an IQ of way over 200.
And the tunnels that are going from the Groom Lake facility, it goes out across and underneath the Tickaboo Valley, as I understand it. They're 70 feet across?
I don't know too much about the tunnels, but we did find a new base out there. It was kind of interesting. I heard about it in 1983-84. A friend of mine was in construction, and he was up there working on TTR, Twin Pot Test Range. And I was pumping him, and I said, "Hey, anything else going on up there?" He says, "Yeah, as a matter of fact, there is." He said, "Over on another range, they're building something." Then I talked to a guy who drove a fuel truck up there, and he said, "Yeah," he said, "Once I was delivering fuel up to TTR, and he said, where we come in at Gold Reed, he said, I had to wait for something like an hour for a procession of cement trucks going by." He said, "It was just unbelievable how many cement trucks there were." And the facility is called Sandia, and I'll show you where it is. It's in Paiute Mesa, and they started in 1980, and they finished in 1987. I did a little story down here on Channel 3 about it. And a guy called in after the newscast and said, "Yes, I'm originally from El Paso, and I was hired to work on Sandia." And he said, "Yes, we started in 1980, finished 1987. It's totally underground. You can't see anything above ground, and believe me, I've tried. Even though the closest point you can get to it on the..."
You're going to show me the picture? Or where?
Which ones?
The location of it.
Yeah. The closest you can get to it is 25 miles. And it's a long ways. The guys that fly into it say that when you land there, and I'm talking about EG&G Special Projects, they take the passengers in and out. They say you can't see the runway until the last second. And then they land. They're not allowed to ever get out of the airplane, like up at Groom Lake. They can go to the cafeteria. At this place, they have to sit in the cockpit. They're not allowed to get out. When the passengers get out, he said they just go behind a little knoll and disappear. Now, I'm sure there's stairways or whatever, but there's nothing. You can't see anything up there. It's very well hidden. And during the Gulf War, a friend of mine talked about it. I think this technology of hiding runways came about in 1980 because I heard about it then, but I didn't have any examples during the Gulf War. During the Gulf War, I worked for a cargo company that did a lot of flying into the Gulf. And although this didn't happen to me, it happened to a friend of mine where he got down to Cairo and got just south of Cairo about 100 miles and got vectored by the American Airwax for delivery of what was in the airplane. And it was at night, and they couldn't see anything, and he was told when to put his flaps down, when to put his gear down, and at 500 feet, lights came on, and he landed there. They unloaded, took off, and went on his way. Since we navigate by inertial guidance, he knew exactly where he was, and he had occasion, like a week later, to come over the same spot, and it was just the middle of the desert. There wasn't a trace of anything, nothing. So they have really good capability of hiding runways. Now, people think Groom Lake is a one-of-a-kind facility, and it is a very big secret facility. But like in 1980, there was 30 other what they call AXOs, aircraft access only. You can't drive in it. In 1980 there was 30, so today there may be more, there may be less. But this is Las Vegas. This Highway 95. This is 93. This is Mercury. This is Beatty. These are the places where I was trying to hike up to. They were the closest to the border that you could leave within the Sandia. Here's Sandia. When they built it, they put this extra little security range around here. There's absolutely no indication that anything is there except an enormous power line going right into there, and it just stops now.
Coming from where?
Coming from down here, maybe down as far as here. This whole area is NRDA, where they originally built the nuclear rocket. All that facility is there. This is the famed Yucca Mountain where they want to store stuff. This is Groom Lake. That's the new strip there. TTR is up there. The orientation of the runway is there. On December 23rd, I was flying a mail contract in a DC-8, and I came by this way, just to the north of here, going into Oakland, and I tuned in Dreamland 120.35. As a matter of fact, if you want to listen to them going in and out, I can put it on the scanner, because I got a big antenna that goes here. So it was about 5:30 in the afternoon, real cloudy, real dark and everything, so I just turned on 123.35 and said, Dreamland, Dreamland, John, Lear, and Bob Lazar wish you a Merry Christmas. And you know that nobody answered me.
The Frankenstein factories where they create alien-looking
There's no
beings.
question about it. I had a friend that worked up at the test site who went to work in the 80s, the early 80s, late 70s and early 80s, over in Saudi Arabia for one of the major contractors over there, Osama bin Laden. And he had a lot of strange things happen. He came back, you know, and before I got into this in 7 years ago, I was relatively straight. I mean, I, you know, did my stint for the CIA. I believed in, you know, God and apple pie and Chevrolet, and, you know, flying saucers to me were, I mean, just, you couldn't even mention it. You know, I wasn't interested then. So we sat down in the early 80s at my house over on the other side of town, and we're kind of saying, you know, what's going on, and nothing, and there was kind of a lull in the conversation. He says, John, what do you know about, I can't think of the word.
We were talking about genetic engineering.
What is it when they create a human?
Cloning?
Create a big, oh, yeah,
Yes,
he says,
cloning.
He says, John, what do you know about cloning? And I said, you know, nothing. I mean, this was so far out to me, and he said, just let me tell you, it's all real and it's all happening. And this is from Cecil McMains, a guy who's so down to earth, who worked on the SR-71, who did a lot of stuff, you know, and he would never, ever come out with something so unusual as that.
So they have Frankenstein, the missing kids, the milk carton kids.
You know, I used to talk a lot about that, and there was a lot of kids that were missing in like 83, 84, 85, and it's my understanding that the FBI discontinued annual reports of missing people because
There was a million that were missing, and then actually about 80 or 90,000 that just simply disappeared. I mean, they didn't wind up as prostitutes on Hollywood Boulevard or as sex slaves or in some shallow grave. There's 80 or 90,000 that just simply disappeared.
Yeah.
We have both seen the film that was taken out of the Dulce facility. Why would somebody make pictures like this showing the creation of some sort of alien being? And this is a facility. This is a facility that's run by the United States government. I mean, with your tax monies.
Yeah, I've heard Hamilton talk about the Dulce facility, and I've also heard about, you know, genetic engineering programs at Area 51.
Yeah, there's no question that Dulce exists. You know, I was the one that kind of led the research on that. I was at a meeting in Crestone, Colorado, and Tom Adams handed me a letter from a lady who lives in Las Vegas, and she was the one that tipped us off that this thing existed. So I talked to her, and she knew the location of some photos and videotape that had been taken inside Dulce by a guard who escaped during what they call the Dulce Wars of 1979. He used to contact her every 6 months, and he said, if I ever miss contacts 2 in a row for a year, you can go after this box, which they had hidden somewhere here in Nevada, that contained 6 minutes of videotape, 25 black and white photos, and some other documentation about what went on in Dulce. About 2 years ago, he did turn up missing. We never heard from him. And I think there was like 12 or 13 attempts after the box, but it had been hidden maybe at least 10 years ago in the terrain and the foliage, and everything changed. I don't think they ever got it out.
He said on level 5 you'd walk on by and people would be in cages and screaming and begging for help, and he was told
I heard that.
to walk straight on through and not look or pay attention.
Yeah.
These people are all mad.
I heard that. And then from another source, Air Force engineering source, I heard that when he went there, they referred to it as Section D. And then Bob heard it referred to when he was up at the test site just once, and somebody mentions something about it being shipped to Dulce, but that's the only reference he ever heard to it.
Now, I call these, the guys who are working in the facility as Igors, the invisible government's obedient robotons. But it really is a Frankenstein factory. I'm hearing rumors at Area 51 that there's at least one live alien living there.
There definitely is one live alien, regardless of what Bob says today.
Yeah.
We're talking about Bob Lazar. During December and January, December of 1988, January of 1989, when he was working up there, he sat right in that chair whenever he'd come back from the test site, and he'd tell me what he saw. And I'll never forget the January 1989. I was sitting at that desk writing out checks, and he comes in, and he's a little fidgety. And after the first night that he got back from the test site, we never discussed anything in this room because they seemed to know everything that was going on. So he came in, sat down, and he looked fidgety, and he kind of went, let's go. So we went out in the back. There's a stable back there, a little alley back there. And I remember that I was, thought he had something really neat to tell, so I didn't grab my coat. I was in a short sleeve, and we went out there, and I remember it was bitter cold. The wind was blowing, and we stood in the alley, and I said, what? And he said, John, you will never know what it's like to see your first alien. I said, God, neat, how'd you see it? And he described the circumstances of walking down this hallway, being led by two guards, and going down the hallway and looking through this window. As a matter of fact, I have the original drawing that he drew this scene, and he said it was maybe a 12 by 12 window, and it had wires running through it, and he looked through it, and there was two scientists facing him in white lab coats and the little gray talking to them. I said, could it have been a doll? Could it have been a midget? He said, no, John, it was an alien. And it was just really neat. He said walk down once, and then when he came back, he looked in, and they weren't there. And today, you ask Bob about that, he says, well, that's what John says, but I really don't remember myself. But I remember. I remember the night it happened, and I remember going out and him being pretty excited.
Do you have the picture?
Yeah, I'll show you a little drawing that he made of what it looked like looking through the window.
See this thing here?
This is the piece of paper that Bob drew that night.
Yeah.
First of all, he drew how the hangars were, 360 feet, each 46 bays. This was the corridor, this was the window, and those were the two scientists, and the little gray. The scientists are facing us, the gray is going that way, and that's what he saw through that window, and he's very meticulous, showing, where and under what circumstances he saw it. This is the drawing of how the hangars fit up against the mountainside.
So this is the gray here?
Right there.
Yeah.
Yeah, these are the two scientists, and that's the window he looked through.
Oh, I see.
In 1962, Kennedy ordered what became known as the report on Iron Mountain, and what he was interested in was finding out if there's anything other than war that could stimulate the economy to the extent war could. We've always had a war to stimulate the economy. Always had one. In recent years, we had Vietnam and then Saddam Hussein, which was all manufactured. I mean, I flew an airline. For an airline, we used to take the troops, American troops in there, Green Berets, to train Saddam for the 2 or 3 years before that war.
Well, they create the crisis.
They create the crisis. So the report from Iron Mountain said really that there was nothing that would stimulate the economy as well as war. And they had considered medical research, space research. They said that there was one thing that would stimulate it, and that was a threat from an extraterrestrial species, real or imagined.